Hello everyone and welcome to this new CTO Talk. I am going to be again your host for this new episode. I'm very happy to have another special guest today, but before going into that, just to recall you, why are we doing this? So first things first, I'm responsible with the technology office for France and the DACH region at Globant. If you don't know much about Globant, I strongly encourage you to visit globant.com and explore how we help our customers reinvent business with technology, their business with technology. And I strongly encourage you to explore more, like the impressive network of studios that we have. These are pockets of expertise required for any digital product journey out there, or look at our products, all of them powered by AI and so forth. I hope you will enjoy it. Now, that being said, getting back to the CTO talk. Why are we doing this? So a few years back, we've started a journey of refining what does it mean to be the ideal CTO. And of course, there are lots of episodes around it. Currently, there are 2 seasons about that. It's still available on our site, pentalog.com. You can find them there, and all the CTO talks that we had before. And that was the idea about the ideal CTO, which we've always said doesn't exist. And we said, let's balance this with CTO talks, the events where we invite people like CTOs, VP of engineers, CIOs, people doing the work, and we ask them the same set of questions. So half of the success of the CTO talk comes from these questions that we are going to raise to our guests. So half of them are prepared in advance. They are mostly the same. And half of them come from the audience. So, dear audience, please use the Q&A module you have here and ask your questions. I will take them one by one and kindly ask our guest to answer to them at the proper moment. Now, that being said, Olivier, please join the stage and tell us a few words about yourself and about the company you work for.
Hello, everyone. Hey, Cornel. Very happy to be here. Thanks for having me. So maybe let's do a quick intro. Yeah, so I'm Olivier, 43-year-old at this point. I'm CTO at BlaBlaCar, managing product, design, and engineering teams. What else? I've been at BlaBlaCar for 7 years at this point. Before that, I spent 13 years at Apple, both in France and in California at Apple's headquarters. And in the past couple of years, I've also been mentoring and coaching CTOs and VP engineerings, as well as I'm an angel investor in many startups. So I've seen startups at very different stages of growth.
Amazing. And what does it mean to be CTO at BlaBlaCar? What are the responsibilities?
Yeah, so I don't know if there's a perfect CTO, so I'll just give you my implementation of the job. So today I'm managing all the teams I mentioned before. So a pretty broad scope. That's what we call R&D at BlaBlaCar. So we develop all the product, the product that like people know. So we're essentially helping people travel. Our mission is to be the go-to marketplace for shared road travel. So helping people find the seat, whether it's in a bus, a carpool, and we're in 22 countries. We have over 115 million users at this point. So that's BlaBlaCar. So I'm part of the executive committee. And the way I think about it is really connecting the rest of the company with the product engineering team and making sure we're aligned in terms of strategy, in terms of organization, in terms of mindset, so that product engineering teams can really deliver the best value and help BlaBlaCar move forward on that mission we've set for ourselves.
Deliver the best value. That sounds easy. Let me ask you this is a basic question, but not necessarily easy to answer. From what you said, what are the most challenging aspects of the implementation of the CTO role at BlaBlaCar?
I mean, I don't know that it's a challenge, but to me, it's part of the job. Is like product and engineering teams are by design the bottleneck. We always have more ideas than what we can implement. I often tell my teams that actually this is how it should be. This structurally, this is how it should be. I do not want to work in a company where engineers are looking for problems to solve and inventing new problems to solve because like we don't have enough ideas to on what the business should do and what are the dimensions we should explore. So there will always be trade-offs. My goal is to essentially create the framework so that we can have the best discussions around those trade-offs. Sometimes it's going to be like slightly different strategic directions, like do you want to explore A or B? Do you want to, for instance, like double down on something that we already know works, or maybe make a more risky bet? Sometimes it's going to be more about like short-term versus long-term, like do you want to optimize for what's going to happen in 3 to 6 months, or do you want to optimize for where will the company be in 18 or 24 months? And helping everyone, including people that are not technical, understand like where those trade-offs are coming from and what it means if, for instance, like if we at some point decide to take maybe some shortcuts, take some technical debt, what does it mean and how do we manage that in the long run extra? So kind of like explaining and translating this back and forth between business teams and product and engineering teams.
So you've said trade-offs. Like in architecture, we have a saying. We never solve problems. We replace them with something that we'd rather do or prefer as a solution. How much do you agree with this statement?
Yeah, I mean, I think in many situations, and certainly when you talk about like architecture, like there are many solutions to a problem and there is no perfect solution. So I think what helps the team, what helps myself is just clarify what are the criteria, like what is the most important thing for us to solve. And again, it can be like, oh, we want to go extremely fast here and want to be have the best possible time to market, or it can be actually this brick is going to be the foundations for many things to come. So we need to be modular, we need to be like solid, and we need to be like solid enough that we can incrementally build on top of it. And to some extent, like the trade-off discussion I was mentioning are a way to discover that, like to have everyone clarify what is it that I'm trying to solve? What is the actual problem I'm trying to solve? What is it that I'm optimizing for? So that, again, sometimes like people disagree on the criteria, but understanding that we're disagreeing on the criteria or that we're not prioritizing the same thing is an excellent first step to having a good trade-off discussion and aligning on a decision.
Interesting. I took lots of notes. I'm gonna come back to this, to what you said. So my voice is a bit rusty. I'm sorry for this. Events I cannot postpone them or change, but I think everything will be fine. So I'm getting back to to my track of questions. Translator role. So when we discuss with CTOs, and especially at every CTO talk, when we ask about how important is the role of the translator played by the CTO talk, translate to business to technology, like business opportunities to technologies, and the technology opportunities to business opportunities, it seems to be a focal point. How important is that in your role?
I mean, I don't know if it's the most important thing, but it's certainly a very important one. I see myself as a kind of like global connector. Certainly, I mentioned it between like business, product, and engineering, and like making sure we're all aligned and like kind of like moving all in the same direction. But also sometimes like between multiple engineering teams, like because I realize that they're solving similar problems, and I will connect like teams and be like, hey, maybe you should talk together, or hey, it might be interesting for you to check out what this other team did. They had the similar problem like a couple of quarters ago, or they are actually in the middle of like fighting a very similar problem. Let's discuss and make sure you exchange ideas. So yeah, I think that connector role, I think this is a very important part of my role, and that's one I like to do too. So I don't know how much it's like. It's probably a mix of both. Like I like it, and I've developed it over the years, and I feel that it is an important part of my role today.
I haven't had it as a term like this, like global connector before. But it seems like the CTOs kind of gather lots of work that's in between many departments and facilitate, at least try to resolve many impediments which are between departments. Some of them related to translation, some of them related to more difficult aspects, agility, business agility. What can you say about you finding yourself in a position like doing lots of stuff or work that in a sense seems not allocated precisely to a department?
Yeah. I mean, I've organized my week in very different types of days or half days. There are days where I just like meet people, do a lot of like reading, updating myself on what's happening, like communicating on Slack extra. And then I have like I try to keep some like blocks of 2-3 hours where I shut down everything and I step back and write down. Because I think it's easy to get overwhelmed with like just like pinging back and forth on and kind of like going from like 30 minutes meeting to another 30 minutes meeting, and it's both exhausting, and at the end of the week you can have a feeling of like, okay, I haven't accomplished anything. And so I think I like that balance. I think it's important to be able to do both. And the time blocks that I take for like deeper work are about like stepping back and like connecting those many dots and kind of like writing things down to remember things, to clarify some train of thoughts and things I've discussed maybe with several people during the week extra. So that's something that that I do a lot. I listen a lot to like weak signals of like people being frustrated or a problem being not solved, or being like carried over weeks after weeks, or like production incidents like happening, and trying to understand like, okay, did we get to the bottom of this, and have we actually solved this problem, or are we like we're doing workarounds but actually the problem is still there. So that's more in the first part of my time, where I look for those weak signals within the organization, like discussing a lot with like business product managers, people in my teams in general, and trying to get kind of like get the vibe, get the temperature of the organization.
And
That's
this
yeah.
applies to the teams that work for you or around you, or also with the executives,
Yeah, no, with everyone.
everyone.
Because like, so BlaBlaCar is a product company, so I will be meeting with the legal team to discuss like compliance and like changes to regulations and how we need to respond to that. I will be meeting, so my team is responsible for like the internal IT department, and so I'll be discussing with the CFO and the finance teams about like, okay, what is like, do we have the right ERP, and do we need to migrate to a new one? What does it mean? Is it aligned with the business strategy, extra? So to some extent, I need to connect with everyone in the rest of the company. I need to connect with our team that's doing customer support and understand how I can help them be more productive and provide the best possible user experience, extra. So I don't think there's anyone in the company with which I don't need to speak to. Like everyone, I think I have to learn from everyone. I have to get inputs from everyone, and there's always a topic that I think is useful for me to chat with pretty much everyone in the company.
Interesting. So before getting back to my track of questions, I very curious about something. Usually CTOs are outsource centric, like looking forward and centered on the product, not in the information system. This is something that CIOs usually look at, and it can happen that CTOs are surprised about the immensity of work, like you said, ERP. Right?
Yep.
So at BlaBlaCar for the CTO, it means the entire information system, or is it product centric, or you have a CIO partner, or
No, I have in my organization I have several VPs. One of them is responsible for like kind of like all of those internal systems. And that team has developed like essentially what a CIO team would develop in terms of expertise, in terms of like ability to project manage, in terms of ability to like create the connection with large software vendors. And I think that's also something where we've diversified over the years. I think like if you looked at BlaBlaCar 10 years ago, the CTO did not have that part of that responsibility, and probably each team was kind of like rebuilding that expertise in house. Like the finance team with their ERP software vendor, the people team with their HR tool, extra. And over time, we're going towards like when it makes sense and when there's like complexity in terms of like integrating a new tool into our ecosystem, for instance, or in terms of like tool administration in the long run, we're going towards like the making sure that this team has a good visibility on it and is able to help the actual team that is will be the one using the new tool. And so typically like we're deeply involved in like the discussion on ERPs, HR tooling, extra, because at the end you need all of those to be well connected and well working together. You want to make sure that when you have a new employee, it's being added to all the right systems. When you are offboarding someone, it needs to be removed from all the right systems so that people don't keep permissions, extra. So like all of that is very important and can either make it very easy or very hard, for instance, to have like a good level of security for your internal employees, extra. So in the end, like we are, yes, like what you describe as kind of like the CIO role is entirely in my perimeter, and that's a muscle we've been growing over the years.
Two questions before I jump to the question that I see in the comments section. Please, it's easier for me if you use the Q&A. Leave the questions there, I will take them later, no problem. But it's easier for me to use the Q&A module. Both ways work, but it just makes my life a bit easier. So how many VPs or the direct reports you have?
I never remember, 6 or 7. It's probably six direct reports. We're a team of 7 if I include myself.
Okay. And I had a question about the collaboration with the executives. This is how it started. So how much time do you spend with the executive management? Are you appreciated as a strong contributor to the strategy, or is it more in the operational aspects of the company? And if you have a particular advice about the executive management and the collaboration with the executives as a CTO, that would be very appreciated.
So with the exec team, we have several rituals. We meet every week. We have a 90 minutes meeting where essentially we everyone brings like specific topics. We follow up on some strategic decisions, make sure that everyone has the same context and is aware of what's happening. We have offsites that we do. I think it's going to be like 3-4 times a year, which we use to like force ourselves to think long term, like, and make sure we think about like, okay, what are the strategic decisions we want to do in the in the next couple of months? Where do we want to be as a company in 2 years, in 3 years? And how do we make sure we, like, what do we need to implement to get there? Those offsites are super helpful because it's hard to essentially do that kind of like long-term thinking when you're like in the midst of your week. Like in the same way I've organized my week between like deep thinking and more quicker meetings and discussing with everyone. As a group, as an executive committee, we've organized our discussions between like more operational things on a weekly basis, and then like creating space for long-term thinking, for long-term dream, setting the strategy in the long run. And that's happening in the offsites, where essentially we cut off from the daily noise so that we can focus on the long run. Maybe on the other part of your questions, so we've been working with coaches because I think that's something that's been super helpful for us as an exec team, to essentially understand that each individual has a slightly different personality and a different response to risk, different response to a new idea. And so we've been working quite a bit with on that, and that's been super interesting. I think it's a mix of like personality and my role, but I'm very much into the accountability, and like if we make a decision, I want to make sure we have a plan to execute that decision. And it's been interesting to see that different people in the exec team had a different, like, we're expecting different things. And for some of them, it was more like, okay, let's move, let's make it happen, and we'll figure out the details later, where I'm very much into the no, if we don't have a plan, then the decision has no value, so let's make sure we have a plan. But yeah, it's I think it's always interesting when you realize that it's not that people don't care about like what you care about. It's just like the initial train of thought or the initial motivation might be very different. And that helps like connect the dots and maybe sometimes understand like clear misunderstandings or understand what the other person needs to move. So yeah, that's been very interesting.
I really appreciate your answer. I hope, dear audience, that they bring value also for you. And I'm going to take some of the questions that were already there because they wait for a while. I'm going to start with the first one from Sarah. As the CTO, what has been the biggest challenge with the recent acquisition of Klaxit in France?
I mean, every acquisition is different, but I think over the course of the past couple of years, we did quite a few of varying sizes, varying geographies, etc. So I think we've gotten better at that. Overall, frankly, I think, and again, like looking back maybe at some other acquisition that we did that were more complex to integrate, but I think the integration of the Klaxit teams and Klaxit product has been going very well. I'm very happy with what the teams have built together. I think a couple of things that we did that helped. We collocated all the teams together like almost from day one, but like very quickly. On the product engineering side, very quickly, we built one team out of the daily engineering team and the Klaxit engineering teams. Like we created a single team with a mix of Klaxit managers, daily managers, and that has helped. We've aligned everyone on a single mission and avoiding the no, my product is a Klaxit application or my product is daily engineering. And we say like, no, like we are one team, and as a team, we will be maintaining both apps. And we quickly decided that we were going to migrate the functionality and the users from the Klaxit application to daily. And of course, like no one likes like their applications to essentially eventually go to a graveyard and being decommissioned. So I think providing early on that clarity and not letting the team like debate endlessly, I think that helps a lot. And at some point, like people align and say like, okay, I understand. Maybe I disagree with the decision. Maybe I feel uncomfortable as an engineer because I'm well versed in this language, and I'll have to learn this new language, and so that's not comfortable for me. But I understand, and let's work together on this. So kind of like hearing that feedback and taking the decision and moving forward together in a single direction, I think has been super helpful. And to me, that's one of the things that is easy to get wrong when you make an acquisition. Like it's easy to be afraid of like, oh, I'll lose everyone if I tell them that their product is being decommissioned, so I'm not going to tell them. But like people are smart, like and so it's pretty like I think it's you have a much in the end you have a much better everyone has a much better experience if you're transparent, if you explain why you're making this decision and how you got to that decision. And then like essentially you ask people to disagree and commit, or to agree and commit in the best case, and if they disagree, still make sure that you heard their feedback, but then move on. So I think that's something that that has worked well in terms of the Plexit acquisition that we did last year.
So in a sense, difficult themes, pockets of questions to be addressed, and but addressed early and transparent.
Yes. Yeah, don't try to put them under the rug. That never works. Or if it works, it means you don't have smart employees and you have maybe an even bigger problem. But no, usually, I mean, I've never seen that really work. Like people are just like pretty smart and they will connect the dots. We have a pretty transparent culture at BlaBlaCar. We share openly with our employees like what's our numbers, like what's our performance, and what's our strategy. And so I think that also goes in that same direction of like, let's hire smart people and give them as much context so that we can all work together in the same direction. Let's not play games and let's not like hide information.
Excellent. I hope, Sarah, that you got your answer. I'll go to Prashant. Sorry for spelling like this. How do you work with product management teams, and what are your top 3 do's and do's and don'ts to do to work effectively with product folks?
Yeah.
Folks.
So that's an interesting question. Maybe I've had a very diverse setup with product teams, from working at Apple where there was no product team on the topics I was working on, and I think that's been true for a while at Apple. It might be changing now, but at the time I was there were no product teams. Essentially, design teams and engineering teams were essentially responsible for like product functions as we define it today. So I discovered, to some extent, what a product manager was when I joined BlaBlaCar like 7 years ago. And now, since almost 2 years now, I actually manage the product teams at BlaBlaCar. So it's been a journey for me, a learning journey. I think to me the main or one important thing to pay attention to is make sure that you have like a strong alignment between business, product, engineering, and your underlying software architecture. I think that alignment helps a lot. It helps with like having everyone like be aligned on a given vertical, having that vertical be as autonomous as possible, and avoiding like, hey, do you prefer to like I mentioned trade-off discussion, and sometimes you have trade-offs that can be solved with a single stakeholder. I think those are the best because you can turn to a single person and ask them like, hey, do you prefer A or B? And sometimes you have teams that end up with like many different stakeholders, and like those trade-off discussions are much harder and hard to structure because it becomes like, hey, would you rather be compliant and or develop the business, but maybe get a fine? And like, this is not a trade-off that anyone can really properly answer. So to me, that's like trying to have that strong alignment, I think helps a lot, and kind of like make the make those trade-off conversation more constructive and more interesting. I think the maybe another do's, I think, is again, like, you need to create that mindset of one team. Like, it's not product team against engineering team, with product team like pushing hard for new features in the product, and engineering teams fighting for technical debt. It really has to be like, no, you have a team that with like software engineers and a product manager, maybe a designer extra, and that team needs to own their scope with all its constraints, including like what is the backlog in terms of like technical debt, what is the backlog on security, what is the backlog on new features and like maybe new business opportunities, and make sure that the product manager understands and embrace that scope and doesn't just see his responsibility as I need to push as many new features as possible at the expense of technical debt, at the expense of security, at the expense of compliance. Really, product manager has to feel responsible for the entire scope. I think that's an important thing that I've seen go well or poorly depending on the setup, and sometimes if the incentives are not aligned, I think that makes for very awkward and not constructive conversations.
So do I understand correctly? Like, this is the ideally how it should be and how you've seen it work, but it may happen in a very poor way, and that's gonna limit the organization.
Yes, but I think it's my responsibility to make sure that the mission is clear and there is strong alignment between like business, product, and engineering, and that the product is really the person connecting the entire scope and having a clear view on the entire scope, not just on the like kind of like new functionality, new features part.
Clear, crystal clear. I hope you've got your answer. I'm moving to Frank, the last question from the chat. What is BlaBlaCar management policy regarding the engineering team? For instance, how they handle dev team one-on-one, when, what, how?
Yeah, we have some best practices around. So essentially, like, we have engineering managers. They manage software engineers typically. Team between like 4 is probably too small, 12 is too many. And so, and I think the sweet spot is, and again, I'm not inventing anything. It's kind of like the Amazon pizza team, but it's like the 6-8 is a sweet spot. The engineering manager is responsible for like essentially connect what I do, but at the level of the team. So connecting the dots, making sure everyone is able to do their best work, being accountable for essentially like hiring, performance management for the individual contributor, connecting with the product manager and making sure the delivery is going well, the team doesn't have any pain points, or we identify and solve them extra. So that's the engineering manager role. Typically, engineering managers do one-on-ones on a weekly or bi-weekly basis with their teams. Typically, managers have a staff meeting with their entire team every week to update them on what's been going on. Typically, there can be a stand-up in the morning extra, like, but we haven't, this is a part that we haven't, I was going to say over processed. Like, there are some best practices. We share those best practices, but we're not enforcing them, and we haven't like carved them in stone and like, you shall have like a weekly one-on-one with everyone in your team. So it's more about like sharing those best practices, helping people grow, and making sure that like the expectations are clear and they're well understood by everyone.
So they are not enforced formally. They're just
Correct.
best practices that you
Yeah.
encourage, and they
Yes.
are widespread.
Yeah.
Very well. Thank you. I hope, Frank, you've got your answer. I'm moving to the next question from Sarah. From a CTO perspective, what has been the biggest challenge?
I
with
already
recent
responded to this
acquisition?
one.
It's the same question. Okay.
Yes, so Sarah put it in the Q&A
Yeah,
tool.
sorry.
That's fine.
How do you deal with the technical debt? How do you handle it? From Bastian.
Yeah. Where to start? So I think a couple of things. I think it's important to make technical debts. So it's important to have a conversation around technical debt, to kind of like name it, make it explicit, explain to like product, business stakeholder, to the rest of the company, what does it look like, and why it's not a bad thing per se. It's a bad thing when you can't manage it anymore and you end up like in a place where your hands are tied. You'd like to innovate on a specific component, but that component has been like not been properly taken care of extra. So like I think there's a bit of storytelling needed around technical debt so that people outside of software engineers can kind of like grasp what it is and have a better conversation around it. Otherwise, I've seen cases where technical debt becomes that term where as soon as you mention it, like everyone's like, oh yeah, that's like engineering stuff. Like that's what engineering say when they want to work on their own thing. And I'm not sure what this is. Seems annoying. It's just a pain in the ass, but I don't understand what it is. I don't think that is the right way to have good conversations. So I think it's important to be able for people to just like touch what it is of like, oh, we'd like to, for instance, oh, we're using an outdated component which has like security vulnerabilities. We'd like to update it, but because it's been so long since we updated it, this is a lot of work. So now we either have the choice to do a large amount of work or to live with that security vulnerability, which has those risks extra. Or it could be like, oh, you like us to add this simple button here that does this when the user clicks on it. Actually, what feels like very simple is complex because maybe the product was not architected this way and it required a lot of changes. Or it could be like, hey, our database is growing exponentially, so it's slowing down. So now some users are hitting some time out extra. But like, really make people touch what are the symptoms of that technical debt, and make that a more pragmatic, more actionable concept, and avoid the kind of like looping everything under a single roof, because I think that makes it harder to have good conversations. So so that's step one, like kind of like help people understand, help non-technical people understand what it's like. And then I think the second part is just like measure it if you can measure it, and B, accept that it's going to take time to improve. And I think this is an area where it's like slow and steady wins the race. So like it's more about like making sure that over time, step by step, you commit to improving like the parts that are a business risk, the part that are the in the worst situation, so that and make sure that you explain like the investment, make sure that you articulate like the benefits of doing that, and that people can see it. Sometimes it will be about tying like new features with technical debt reduction, saying like, hey, actually on this component, we'd like to do this new feature, but before we can do that, we need to do this re-architecture. And so here's the plan to do that with two steps. Like first, like re-architect the current component, and then we'll add the new feature. But eventually, like I think, to me, the goal is to avoid having to declare bankrupt on a component. I think that's always like a failure because you end up in a place where you're like, oh no, like for 6 months, I won't be able to do anything. Like we have to stop all the presses. I think that's always a problem. Like that's very painful for everyone on the business product side. So to me, the goal is really to step by step, regularly be able to manage that technical debt and improve the situation so that you never end up in a place where you have to declare bankrupt. And if you need to take technical debt, articulate that trade-off. I think a mistake I've seen engineering teams do too often is really product and business team told us we needed to do this in 3 weeks. The only way we're going to make it happen is by taking like all of those shortcuts. But hey, we have to do it in 3 weeks, so let's do it. I'm like, okay, let's do it, but let's clarify with our stakeholders what is the cost that we are paying and how are we making sure that maybe right after we deliver that first version, we commit and we kind of like have a moral contract that we won't just like move on and run to the next new feature, but we'll take the time to fix things and to make them maintainable in the long run. I think that's a good way to avoid like just accumulating a lot of technical debt.
A very rich answer, have to admit. It recalls me of an anecdote from another CTO talk where the guest was saying that they worked on a new product for 3 months, and when they calculated the technical debt was for several years. So it's a bit funny in terms of sometimes it might be an excuse, sometimes it might be a misconfiguration the way we measure it. You said if you can measure it.
Yeah.
But I have a complementary question to the technical debts because everyone seems to have a definition, a unique, their own definition of technical debt. So if you can do 1 minute on what's your definition of technical debts?
I see it on 4 different, maybe 5 different dimensions, but essentially to me it's so anything that gets in the way of long-term maintainability, so ability to upgrade dependency and to maintain in the long run a component. What gets in the way of like performance, so it can be like, okay, this database query is very poorly optimized, and so as we get more users, like we're getting slower and slower, and it's going to become a problem. It can be what gets in the way of reliability, creating outages, production incidents. It's what gets in the way of team velocity. It's like, and this is something that over time you see where teams slow down step by step, and one day you wake up and you're like, oh, to do this small feature we actually need like 6 months of work of the entire team, and you're like, okay, what happened? And I think it's always interesting to be like, okay, what do we need to fix now so that tomorrow we can remain like flexible, agile, and continue to have a good like velocity efficiency. And the last one is really about like ability, and I connected to like ability to maintain the long run like a component, but it's like ability to evolve it. And sometimes like you've made shortcut choices that maybe might be fine in a short term, and you ship that new feature, but suddenly like you've made adding new features or improving that component a lot more complex, a lot more hard than it should be. So to me, it's that constellation of problems, and frankly, I don't think there's one that's more important than the other. Like if you have like if you tick all the boxes, but your components is down like every hour, every day once an hour, you have a huge problem probably. If it's very reliable but it's very slow, you have a problem. If it's fast and reliable but you're completely unable to update its dependencies, very soon you'll have a big problem and you'll have vulnerabilities. So I think all of those are interesting to keep in mind. Maybe depending on your business context, you have like some that are more important than others. But at some point, you need to make sure you're able to monitor all dimensions.
I have a million questions about it. So, but we'll have to stay with this answer, and maybe in another session we will develop, or who knows, a special webinar about it. So let's replan what. So we still have here 4 questions, and I will need 2-3 minutes at the end to for you to close the session with a message for the audience. So should be enough time. Let's do 2 minutes per answer.
I'll try to be quick and synthetic.
Again from Sarah, and let me read it. It's not the same. No, it's not the same.
No.
How close do you and your chief information security officer work together? Are there some decisions that are done mutually?
We work very well together because I don't have a CISO. I'm responsible for security at BlaBlaCar, so I'm very aligned with myself.
So no
And
CIO, no chief
no,
information security officer,
yeah,
no chief data.
no. I have a VP data, and I'm working hand in hand with him, but he's reporting to me, and we work together on data topics.
And no chief product.
I have a VP, and same. I have a VP product reporting to me, responsible for the entire product management team. And frankly, there are some cases where I feel it would be good to be more challenged and have someone maybe more pushing me. And sometimes I'm like, okay, it's obviously it's easier to align stakeholders because I will be the one pushing the recommendation and the implementation. But yeah, so this is probably this is a specific setup, but it's been working pretty well for us. I mean, given my history at Apple, I was working very closely with security and privacy teams at Apple. And it's always been like kind of like an area that I really like, I enjoy, and I think it's super important. I'm super aligned with BlaBlaCar's culture from that perspective because like our users' data is one of our most important assets, and we're not selling it, we don't do ads, and so we want to make sure that the data that our users trust us with is kept secure. And that's an important part of like why are people trusting the platform, and so I want to make sure that we protect that properly. So I've been pushing for like to make sure that we were elevating the level of security over the years, and we've been able to make good progress there.
Very straightforward. Thank you for sharing also the previous Apple experience. From Anonymous, what is BlaBlaCar cloud architecture approach? Private cloud, public, both, like hybrid, multi-cloud?
We're fully hosted on Google Cloud, and as we've done some acquisitions, like we made sure we migrated the existing workloads to Google Cloud. We're using a mix of like open source products, some managed products, and frankly, to me, so we're not trying to have the smallest cloud build possible. What I'm optimizing for is more for team velocity, because the cost of a single engineer is very quickly going to be much higher than maybe the 5-10% we could shave off on our cloud bill. So overall, like our goal is to go fast. We are doing regular RFPs to make sure we have the right prices on our cloud spend. And overall, we've been happy with that setup, and it's been going for almost 5 years at this point.
Great, and congrats also for all these magnificent velocity makers or empowering public cloud players. Let's go further. Kartik. How do you organize the inflow of huge technical information that you receive on a daily basis? Okay.
So I'm subscribed to a huge amount of Slack channels in our organization, but we have I think we've developed a good usage of Slack with like each project has a dedicated Slack channel. Each team has a Slack channel where other teams can ping them and get information. And so actually it's fairly easy for me to know what are the channels I need to read, what are the channels I could read if I have time, but if I don't, that's fine. What are the ones that I don't need to read? And then we're doing bi-weekly meetings where we kind of recap where we are with the project and kind of like do a review, decide when there are big decisions that we need to make extra. So that's that. We moved between like or since COVID and some of the lockdown, we moved a lot more to remote and to a much more written culture, which I think helps a lot. And so I think for most decisions, like we ask people to write a one pager. Sometimes it's not strictly a single page, but it can be like 2-3 pages, but a short document that recaps what is the problem statement, what are the alternatives, and what's the recommendation. That's been also super helpful to both record and the decision and make sure that everyone has the same context. So I think that is, to me, that's part of like what's been working well for me and how I've been able to keep my my eyes on all the balls that are in the air.
Okay. I hope it answers your question. As a CTO, what key personal learning had you in the past year? From Stefan.
So I don't know if it's strictly in the past year, but I think one thing that has been super interesting for me is sometimes someone says something that tickles you or that triggers you or that makes you mad. I think those are very important signals to kind of like look back and do a bit of introspection and be like, okay, why when that person said that, why did it make me angry or why did I reacted that way? And I think as leader, as manager, it's even more important because you need to understand where you're coming from and what are those like what is your body telling you and why are you reacting this way. So I've been practicing that a lot, and every time it's like interesting. So like, okay, stepping out of a meeting where maybe things got a bit heated, or like, okay, why is this important, or why did I react this way? I think it's always a very rich like train of thought of like, oh, actually it's because this, or it's because I feel like this is happening between those two people I try. And so I think it's always important to reflect and make sure you don't just stay on the surface, but like take the time to go in depth and understand why this person reacted this way or why you reacted this way. I think it's always, usually it's like you have the problem that's superficial, like how people like what you see, and then you have like what's really happening, which could be like, oh, actually there's something wrong between this person, and this is where I should debug the problem, not at the surface, because like the surface is just a symptom, it's not like the important problem to solve. So like making sure you take the time to go in depth on when this happens, I think is super valuable.
A quick yes, no. Did you have special periods in your life when you focused more on the development of your emotional intelligence, like improving these kind of aspects, or it was along the way with the flow?
No, I did therapy a couple of years ago, and it was super interesting from that perspective. But I've always been interested in like introspection. I think like finding the time for yourself is to do that, I think is always a good investment.
Great. Thanks for your honest answer. I'll go further. How much time do we have? 4 minutes. Two questions. How can we connect with Olivier? I'll answer here. LinkedIn, write him, connect directly. And another one for Anonymous, 2 minutes. Sometimes we can come across various SDKs, third-party dependencies where we have no knowledge. Meanwhile, the management team asks for timeline for feature releases. It's 2 minutes for me to read.
Yeah.
How to deal with that, as we ourselves don't know how much time will it take, and even the library will work for us or not.
Yeah. So I think there are two answers to that. The first one is I think it's important to train your stakeholders and to, again, like I mentioned, like kind of like help them understand what technical debt is. And I think you need to help them understand what is the day-to-day of an engineering leader, what is the day-to-day of a software engineer, and help them grasp the fact that, yeah, there are some unknowns, and that maybe the first part of the work is to do that discovery. And so one thing we've done, and that's the second part to my answer, is articulating okay, we are going to be doing the discovery for this problem. And sometimes we carve out like time in the sprint and say like, okay, we're going to do a discovery, and at the end we'll have a better idea of like what is the time we need, whether this, for instance, external library is going to solve our problem, or how are we going to, we'll have an architecture and we'll know how we're going to build this new feature. So carving out actual time and giving it a name. So at BlaBlaCar, we call it like technical discovery, I think is a way, and this is also a way to tell people like, okay, you're asking me how much time this problem is going to take to be solved. I'll spend, and that's where I think it's part an art, part of science. It's like, okay, I think we should be spending like 2 days to explore that, and in 2 days we'll be able to give you a first answer, or maybe you'll need a more precise answer. Then maybe we should spend like 4 days on this, but kind of like help with that. I think also often when an engineering team gives a date and say like, hey, we'll need a month to work on this, business stakeholders hear this as like commitment. It's like, in a month this will be done, which is not what I just said. And so I think practicing this and saying like, no, if I only work on this, then I think I have an 80% chance of being done in a month. You want the 90% chance answer? Then maybe I'll add 2 more weeks. You want the 100% chance answer and a hard commitment? I'll add even more time. But is this really what you want? Or are you fine with the 80% answer, accepting that maybe in 20% of the cases, I might take a bit more time? And kind of like creating that transparency and helping people understand that what it means when you give a date, it's not a hard commitment. It's like based on the best information you have at this point, this is your current assessment. It might change. It might change because of external factors like a big production incident, or it might change because as you do the work, you discover more things that were not expected. I think that's important to help like management teams to realize.
So it makes total sense for me. Thank you for your answer, and I hope anonymous user that you've got your answer. Olivier, we are at the end. It was the last minute. If there is something, one thing unique you want to share with the audience to help them further in becoming a CTO or being a better CTO, what would that advice be?
I mean, I think I already shared it, but I think like and it's not specifically about CTOs, it's more about like being a leader, being a manager. I think you have I know it's a moral obligation, but I think it's important that you know yourself, and so that you can help people grow and help people develop. And so kind of like having that honest introspection moment and making sure you take the time. So, and I mentioned a couple of cases of like, okay, understanding why I'm reacting this way, or why I'm what's happening in what happened in this meeting where maybe I became like a bit angry, or I snapped at someone. I think it's super important to, in the long run, like be able to lead by example, be able to develop yourself and develop the people around you. So I think to me that's that would be my advice in terms of like where to spend a bit of time. It doesn't have to, you don't have to do like a 10-year psychotherapy, but I think again, like looking inward and making sure you're spending a bit of time to understand how you work, how you function. And maybe like there are some people you connect very easily with, there are some people you have a very hard time connecting. Usually It's just that some people work the way you work. Those other people, they work a bit differently. They're not wrong. They're not bad people. It's just they work differently. And taking a bit of time to understand that the way you work is not universal, and that some people work differently, and there are different types of languages and different ways of connecting. I think it's a game changer, and it helps like have like more peaceful collaboration with throughout the company. So I think it's always a good investment.
Thank you, Olivier. So such a beautiful and smart advice. Please, dear audience, I hope you embrace it and you've loved the answers and the time spent with us. I'm looking forward for the next session with you, next CTO talk. Thanks for your time, Olivier. Highly valuable your presence here, and thanks for your answers. Looking forward. Remember, you can contact with him on LinkedIn. Ask him tons of questions. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Cornel. Thanks, everyone, for joining. Bye.